We're going to go ahead and get started. Happy Friday evening, everyone, and welcome to our session, A Balanced View on Taking the Giving What We Can pledge. If you don't know what that is, no worries. We are going to start from the basics, so you're in the right place and you're in good hands. Today, we are joined by Grace Adams, who is the head of marketing at Giving What We Can. And a little bit later in the talk, we'll also be joined by Akil Bansal, who is a medical doctor currently working here in London, and Liska Weintraub, who works on various content-related projects at the Center for Effective Altruism. So I'll get out of the way and give the floor in a second. I just want to remind you first, there'll be a live Q&A after the talk. So we encourage you, during the talk, as you're thinking of things that you want to ask, go ahead and open Swapcard. You can navigate right now to the live discussion tab, and then submit your questions there and upvote questions that other people have submitted. And then I'll pick out the ones that people are most curious about to ask afterwards. And since you'll definitely still have questions after that, there'll be office hours immediately following this session in the Drake room, which you can find a little bit outside those doors. So without further ado, here's Grace.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us on the first night of EAG Global. So as Eric said, I'm Grace, I'm the head of marketing at Giving What We Can, and I'm thrilled to be giving this talk to you this evening. And I'm also grateful to be joined by Akil and Liska, who will be joining me a little bit later tonight to discuss why they have and haven't taken a pledge themselves. And then we'll also have a chance to hear from them in the Q&A as well. So since you're all here in this room listening to me today, I thought I would tell you a little bit about why I pledged and how I learned about effective giving. So I first heard about effective giving and effective altruism through a talk that my friend had organized at the consulting firm that I worked for. She'd organized a talk from Giving What We Can and Peter Singer. And growing up in Melbourne, I'd always heard about Peter Singer, who's also from Melbourne. So I thought I should go along and finally hear what this man was on about. So from then, I sat down and I really listened to the ideas around how much more good some charities can do compared to others. And I was really, really compelled by what I heard. After that talk, I made the largest donation I had ever made that day, and I was really inspired to learn how I could give more and really thought about what I could do to give. But this is where things got a little bit complicated. I was actually pretty unwell. I was dealing with 2 chronic illnesses and was facing the fact that I could no longer work full-time. And even harder than that, I wasn't sure whether I'd even be able to work full-time again. So I was now earning much less, thinking about how I could give more. So taking a pledge to give 10% of my income seemed a little bit out of reach. But what I did decide to do was to take a trial pledge to give 3% of my income for a year to see how it felt. And to my surprise, I actually felt better about giving more than I had ever done before, even though I was earning less. I do want to acknowledge that I was extremely lucky to be living in Australia with access to free healthcare and a good social safety net, and be able to live with my parents for some of that time who were able to support me. So there were a lot of things that made giving 3% on a part-time income really achievable for me. The thing that really struck me during this time, while I was giving a little bit more, was exactly how much I was willing to spend to reduce the suffering that I was going through myself, and how small the relative cost was to help someone else. I deeply felt that everyone's suffering on this planet is equal, and if I couldn't alleviate my own suffering, I could at least be trying to alleviate the suffering from others. And this was pretty real to me because the medication I was on was costing me $300 a month, which is quite a lot of money on a part-time salary. And then finding out that I could help buy medicines to prevent malaria for just $7 really put in contrast exactly what I was able to do for other people and what my income could really buy. Eventually, a new drug did come on the market, which totally changed my life, and eventually allowed me to regain the ability to work full-time. And then when I was healthy enough, I decided to take the Giving What We Can pledge to donate 10% of my income for the rest of my life. And to be honest, I am a little bit uncertain whether my health will allow me to work as much as I would like in the future. And if that is the case and I can no longer work full-time and giving 10% does turn out to be really challenging, I will be willing to resign from my pledge. But I didn't want to let, and still don't want to let, the fear of what might happen in the future stop me from doing something that I have found so meaningful and that has done so much good already. The push to be donating 10% of my income is so much more than I would have done otherwise, and I've now donated thousands of dollars that I wouldn't have done in another situation. And that's been so incredibly meaningful to me. And I know that even if my salary drops and I'm earning less, I know that I can live a great life on a smaller income as I did a few years ago. And all of this has been, just such an important part of my journey to being here. And I guess that's why I'm up here talking to you today. But that's enough about me, and we can get into the main content of the talk. So tonight I'll be talking through some of the considerations around taking the Giving What We Can pledge, and I'm going to share some user research that we've been doing on the topic over the last 6 months. And we're also going to be hearing a little bit more in depth from Lizka and Akil about their personal experiences as well. So before I take you through all of that, I did want to say up front that Giving What We Can isn't in the business of trying to guilt trip anyone into taking the pledge. And we respect everyone's journey in doing good in their own way. And although we do think that we have something to offer everyone or most people in this room, it's 100% a personal decision. And I'm hopeful that tonight's talk does inspire you to think a little bit more about pledging and to come and chat to our team throughout the conference. We'll be available to have conversations with you about pledging the whole weekend. So with that being said, we're going to start by covering the Giving What We Can pledge, a little bit about its history and growth and why we promote it. And then we'll get into why people may or may not take the pledge. So the Giving What We Can pledge is a non-legally binding pledge to donate at least 10% of your income to the organizations that you think can most improve the lives of others. The creation of this pledge back in 2009 gave birth to a community of people who were committed to effectively improving the lives of others with their resources and recognized just how far donations given to the right charities could go. They also felt compelled to help others given the relative privilege and luck that they experienced, and recognize that every life, regardless of their location and status, is equally valuable. And this relatively small community that started in just a few locations in the UK and the US has now grown to a community of close to 9,000 people who have taken a Giving What We Can pledge, with pledges in 100 countries across the globe. 100 countries is definitely a special milestone, and we're really grateful to have a global community alongside us. We think that the Giving What We Can pledge is a fantastic tool to help us try to achieve our mission of creating a world where giving effectively and significantly is a cultural norm. Achieving this vision would unlock an incredible amount of funding to tackle the world's biggest problems. As demonstrated by Natalie Cargill and Longview in their report of What If the 1% Gave 10%. For example, if you're earning just £46,000 post-tax in the UK or $62,000 post-tax in the US, you're in the top 1% of income earners in the world. And if all of the 1% gave 10% of their income, we'd be able to achieve all of the things up on screen in just 2 years. And from my personal perspective, it would also create a deeper culture of altruism and compassion now and into the future across the globe. And we know that the pledge works for getting people to give effectively and significantly in the long term. To our positive surprise, we found in our impact evaluation that the average recorded donations of Giving What We Can pledges seems to increase over time. And because donations increased over time, this more than compensated for the dropout of any other pledges. And there are some caveats to this, and we're not 100% confident that it will replicate in future evaluations, but we do see it as a strong signal that people generally stick to their pledge. And the Giving What We Can pledge also seems to help people give more than they would have otherwise. The surveys that we ran for our impact evaluation suggest that roughly a quarter of donations made by pledges are counterfactual on Giving What We Can's existence. So far, our community of pledges have donated over $200 million, which is an incredible impact for less than 9,000 people. And we're just getting started. Giving What We Can aims to reach 10,000 Giving What We Can pledges in 2024 and has ambitions to ultimately reach more than a million, which would put us much closer to our mission of a world in which giving effectively and significantly is a norm, and to creating these kinds of outcomes. So now let's assume that you're on board with the vision of Giving What We Can and the idea of the pledge in principle. Let's go over some of the factors that you might want to consider before taking a pledge. The first of these is how your lifestyle might change in the short or long term when donating 10%. Whether taking the pledge would mean giving up just a few luxuries you might be able to easily part with, or whether this would put significant financial strain on you and your loved ones. Whether using your money to free up time or to build skills to do something else impactful might make sense for you. In some cases, you might want to invest in your future, like pursuing study in a different profession that might help you have impact long term, that you couldn't otherwise pursue if you were giving 10% of your income. If you have any temporary financial constraints that might mean that now isn't the right time, perhaps you've taken out a big loan with significant interest, and that paying it off more quickly might make a lot of sense in the long term. And whether the health of you or a loved one could affect your ability to give. If you've been in a similar position to me, it is really worth thinking about whether you're able to commit to 10% in the long term. And of course, if your circumstances change and you're no longer able to fulfill it, you could resign from your pledge. And I don't want to say this to water down the commitment at all. Our community of pledges are deeply committed, and the pledge isn't a decision to take lightly, but I do think that it's important to know that should the unexpected happen, knowing that you can resign if you need could help you feel more comfortable in committing to give effectively for many, many years, and maybe even your whole career if things turn out the way you hope. And finally, also, we encourage people to think about how much good you can actually do through effective giving and taking a pledge, and how pledging aligns with your values. Ultimately, we do think that giving effectively yourself and helping to spread the norm by pledging presents an extraordinary opportunity to do good. So we encourage you to think about how this opportunity trades off with any personal circumstances that might weigh against pledging for you. That's the general advice that we give people who are thinking about pledging. But this year, we've also undertaken, or we're currently undertaking, a large user research project to understand all the reasons why people pledge and why they haven't taken a pledge. We've collated feedback from surveys and from other sources, and we're in the process of conducting user interviews. We're also working on a survey to understand some of the relative importance of these factors and how far they generalize. And while we're still working through this process, some of the patterns that we've found match with what we've heard in anecdotal kind of conversations as well. And so this is what I'm hoping to cover in the next section. But I did want to say quickly that the people that we have spoken to in the user interviews and in our research have been people that generally align with the effective giving approach already. So this doesn't cover any barriers or concerns that people might have outside of effective giving. So with that context, let's get into the next section. So the first kind of concern that people came up with in our user interviews was around financial concerns. And this is concerns around financial instability and the ability to commit to donating 10% of income, especially common in those early in their careers or with significant financial obligations. And this was probably the most significant reason that came up in our user interviews. And I do think for those who don't have a safety net or emergency funds or are in a situation that's already causing financial stress, that it makes total sense not to pledge 10% of your income. But this is where looking at other options for giving, if you do want to give, maybe even taking a trial pledge could make sense for you. Some people in our user interviews also were worried about taking a lower paid job that was paid less in the future and then feeling like they wouldn't have enough to donate 10% of their income in the future. And I think that that might be a particularly relevant kind of consideration for people in this audience at EA Global. And if that is the case, I think it makes sense to figure out how much you might expect to earn in a more impactful job and to see how much you might actually realistically be able to give. For myself, I left a higher paying job and career track in management consulting to come work for a nonprofit. And I've actually found that earning less on top of giving my 10% has been a lot easier than I expected. But of course, that might not generalize for everyone. The next kind of concern that came up in our user interviews as a key theme was around making a long-term commitment. Some people were reluctant to commit to a pledge due to not wanting to constrain their future selves. That is, they were concerned that their values or needs might change over time and that pledging might not feel right for them in the future. We also saw some people being worried about not being able to uphold the pledge due to changing circumstances and felt that breaking a serious commitment would be unacceptable to them. And as mentioned earlier in the talk, we view the pledge as a serious commitment, but breakable in unforeseen circumstances. An example that Toby Ord gave was that if you promise to pick your niece up from school, but then you get into an accident and you have to go to the emergency room, of course it's okay for you to renege on that promise. And maybe that seems like kind of a random example here, but it does seem in the community that some people take the idea of making a pledge or a promise very, very seriously. So I think it's worth saying. There was also some concerns around social judgment or negative perceptions of do-gooder behavior. So many people do feel that giving is private, and they're concerned that being public about their giving could create a negative perception of them from their friends and family. Anecdotally, I actually have seen this go both ways. I have heard of some people that have had negative experiences from sharing their giving, but I've also had many, many people tell me that talking about their giving has brought them closer to their friends and family and inspired many new people to give effectively themselves. And there was also the perception of kind of satisfied moral requirements, or to put that more simply, the feeling of like already having done enough. So this really came to be the belief that engaging in an impactful career is sufficient for fulfilling someone's moral obligations, reducing their perceived need to take the pledge. So I do think it's important for us to think about how much of our time and resources we want to dedicate to doing good. And I think that we should feel very wary of the need to spend all of our time and resources on doing good. It's okay and good to have multiple goals and values. But of course, these two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Many of our pledges work in impactful jobs as well as pledge. And finally, the one that kind of like came up a little bit here was around the lack of a compelling value proposition. So especially if people plan to donate anyway or are currently donating. Generally at Giving What We Can, we talk about a few key reasons to pledge. being commitment, the idea that the pledge helps you hold yourself accountable to your values and what you'd like to do long term. Community, providing a group of people to support you in your journey on doing good. And then culture, which is the idea of promoting this like positive social norm. But so if you're already committed to giving 10% of your income and you're not worried about value drift, you don't need a new community, and you're not really buying the idea that the pledge is a great way to promote that cultural norm, maybe you decide not to pledge. And although we do think that there is a lot of value in taking a pledge, we're very happy to have people in our community who are giving and not pledging. That being said, if you are already giving 10%, we do believe strongly in this idea of creating a positive social norm. Especially, we do think that peer referrals are one of the best things that we can do. And peer referrals are one of the biggest sources of new pledges. So if it doesn't seem like a high cost to take a pledge on top of giving the 10% that you're already doing, we think that setting a positive example could be a really strong reason for you to consider it. So those are some of the reasons that we found in our user research that reasons that people may not be pledging. I wanted to cover some of the reasons that people are pledging. When it comes to what motivates individuals to pledge, I wanted to cover some of the pledge motivations that people submit when they sign up. So when you go through the pledge flow on our website, at the end, there's a little box where you can submit what motivated you to take a pledge that day. And we have an automation on our staff Slack that comes and shares all of these motivations to us on a daily basis, which is definitely the highlight of my job, is seeing every day we're getting these new motivations come in, and it's so special. So I wanted to share a few of these with you today, which these verbatim pulled from the list in the last couple of months. Because whilst I'm working out how to spend 80,000 hours of my career to effectively contribute to bettering our society, our world, and our policies, my money can go to those having an impact now. I've been waiting to donate until I have something to donate, but that was probably been the case since the day I was born. I define my living purpose as to accompany more people in pursuing happiness through kindness and advocacy, to assist more people in achieving happiness through goodwill and justice. And I believe donating to the right causes can truly make a difference. I also believe that pledging to do so publicly signals that belief is sincere and might inspire others to do the same. And so I recently went through several hundred of these, trying to pull out the key themes. Several hundred isn't too many. So I pulled out some of the key themes that we saw through this. And so I wanted to take you through the most common themes that came up. So the recognition of the luck of being born into a good life and the privilege that this affords us to help others. Feeling that giving is the right thing to do or a responsibility. Recognition that money can do a lot more for others than it can do for us. A wish to inspire others to give or to set an example for others, and this could be people's friends, family, or even someone's children. Wanting to take action and just start. And the desire for accountability and commitment that the pledge provides. Finally, in our user research, we also encountered several common misconceptions about the pledge, which contributed to varying degrees of how willing people were to pledge. So some of these common misconceptions were that you need to donate at least 10% of your income on an annual basis. And while we do strongly encourage people to keep the habit of giving annually, regularly, at least annually if you can, the pledge itself is over one's lifetime, and we have members who might donate a little less in some years and a little more in others, while being mindful to make sure that they meet 10% of income over their lifetime. The second is that only charities on the Giving What We Can platform count towards your pledge. But in truth, the pledge is to donate to give to organizations that can most improve the lives of others. And it's up to every individual to figure out what this means to them. Giving What We Can, of course, provides guidance on where we think your donations can be most effectively given. And we provide education on how to find these kinds of charities. But it's ultimately your responsibility to select the organizations that you think can most improve the lives of others. And the third is that there's only one pledge, but we actually offer several different pledges. We offer a trial pledge, which allows you to specify the percentage you'd like to give, as well as how long to give for. And I'll say a little bit more about that at the end of the session, as we think it's a great way to try out a pledge and can help overcome some concerns or barriers that people might be facing. It's also how I started, as I talked about earlier. And we also offer a further pledge, which is a different way to give, which allows you to set a specific kind of living budget and then to donate everything above that amount that you set. And we offer a company pledge where companies can give at least 10% of profits. Additionally, both the trial pledge and Giving What We Can pledge have options for students and those who aren't earning, so that if you're not currently earning an income, you're only ever bound to give 1% of spending money available to you. We also have kind of a new, exciting option for the Giving What We Can and trial pledges, which is around the possibility to add pledging wealth into your pledge. We've done this in partnership with Chris Anderson, the head of TED, for the launch of his book, Infectious Generosity. And very excitingly, just recently, Bill Gates called Infectious Generosity as one of the books to read for the summer of 2024 and praised the inclusion of the Universal Giving Pledge, which is the Giving What We Can pledge, which is a really wonderful endorsement of our work. So I have talked a lot about what we've seen in our user research and anecdotally through discussions with members, but I wanted to bring up two people to talk a little bit more personally about their own experiences. So we're going to hear from Akil, who pledged in 2021, and Lizka, who wrote a piece at the end of last year about why she hasn't taken a pledge. So come on up. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Great. So maybe Lizka, I'll start with you. So you wrote a piece towards the end of last year about why you haven't taken a pledge, which I think is really great to say that we really appreciate that, because it can be hard to talk about why people haven't done that. So I think it was really great for you to share that publicly. So I wanted to ask you, I guess, what you felt the main reasons for not having pledged were.
Yeah, so I think that the pledge has a bunch of very real benefits. And I think those are kind of, when they're weighed against potential costs, they're usually weighed against personal costs, or you have to sacrifice a bit of your lifestyle, that sort of thing. And I was thinking about kind of especially for people who want to try and use their careers to do a bunch of good, kind of taking the point of view of, I think there are, in fact, also potential costs, depending on your circumstances, to that goal as well. And so I was kind of trying to weigh the, I think, real benefits of the pledge against some of those costs. And I think some of the specific ones for me are, I think broadly having runway is very useful. So this is like having money that you can use for things like an upskilling thing, or like doing a master's, maybe an unpaid master's, or maybe a master's that just really doesn't pay much and you're in an expensive city. Or starting something new if you want to, you really think that you have an exciting idea, but you really need to test it. You might want to take some time off and do that. And maybe having some runway enables you to do that. Another one that's potentially a bit weirder, but I actually think is quite important, is having the independence to not be super reliant and not be emotionally or psychologically really tied to your current workspace. Have the freedom to be you know what, I think I really need to go do something else right now. it's hard for me to weigh those things, but like they seem real. I also am quite confused about exactly how much runway people should be trying to have. And like that probably really depends on your circumstances. Like, yeah, do you have a safety net, as you mentioned, that sort of thing. And also, just to be clear, I don't think like if you're trying to build runway, I don't think that's like a reason to never donate. It just sort of is a penalty on donations. So like, yeah, I kind of, when I'm trying to factor this in, I usually basically like if it's a really exciting opportunity, I still want to donate. And also, it's just like sometimes fun or something. Yeah, and the other thing that's sort of like the same as runway, but also I think about it a bit differently, is that I think my life circumstances might change. So like right now, I don't really need to spend that much time, spend that much money on myself. Like, yeah, main expenses are like rent or something, like flights. But, you know, I have some goals that are not about the world. And I have some things that I kind of don't endorse, like trying to sacrifice in order to do trying to better the world. For instance, if I need to support my family or something like that, where, you know, I probably want kids. And if something like that happens, I think there might be circumstances where I might be weighing kind of spending a lot of my time and energy in ways that are costly for my work, or spending some extra money. So all of that, that's sort of the things I discussed in my post. And yeah, I might still take the pledge. I'm not sure. Yeah, but that's where.
I mean, this is definitely not
Right.
trying to get you up on stage to like get you to take the pledge. That's not the point of the talk.
Yeah.
And I think like, yeah, many of those things that you mentioned have kind of been some of those like similar themes that came up in our user research. So it's always nice to hear that that's confirmed in personal experience. Akil, you took a pledge in 2021. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey to taking a pledge and what motivated you?
Yeah, so I guess for me, during high school and university, kind of ad hoc had given little bits of money to, you know, local charities or things that people were working on, and didn't think terribly much about it. And then in medical school, I had the fortune of seeing the misfortune that other people around the world were living in. So I got to do some placements in Ghana and in rural India, and I saw the horrific conditions that a lot of people have to live in. And so that kind of spurred me to start donating a little bit more. I was a student, so I didn't have terribly much money, but, you know, odd jobs that you did, I was donating the odd $100, $200 here and there. But over my uni career, and then when I started as a junior doctor and started to have a tiny bit of money, I started to give a little bit more frequently, and I was also thinking a little bit more about where I was giving. So I was kind of looking at where I could give effectively, and didn't consciously kind of realize it, but over time, I think in late 2020, early 2021, I realized that giving was actually something that I was doing much more frequently. I was doing it, you know, rather than once or twice a year, I was thinking about it a lot more. I was kind of reading more information out there, donating every month or 2 months. And, you know, but it didn't kind of feel real in some ways, I guess. I was just kind of sitting in my room, thinking about it, and then occasionally clicking some buttons and making a donation. And I think I came across the pledge in early 2021, and at the time it just seemed like something that was reflective of the activities that I was doing and affirming of my identity as someone who was giving. And so really without terribly much thought, I was like, all right, let's just do it and see what happens. And so I took the Giving What We Can pledge in early 2021. And I think it really, for me, has affirmed my identity as someone who values giving and giving effectively. And when I took it, and still to this day, I see it as that's kind of like the shining beacon or the goal to donate 10% every year. And I think that a lot of the things you said, Grace, in the talk resonate. You know, there've been times when that has been tested. So in 2022, I took a break from clinical medicine to do the global health and biosecurity research at Charity Entrepreneurship, now Ambitious Impact, and took, ironically, from the NHS a pay cut to do that. And I thought, okay, perhaps in this year, you know, I'm donating more of my time, and I anticipate that I'll be able to donate less than 10%. Luckily, I was actually able to do that due to some lovely things that happened. But I kind of knew that this is the goal that I was working towards. And actually over time, having that pledge, I think, for me, in addition to affirming that identity, has actually helped prevent some value drift, I think, in me. I think that there's always a chance that it would have fallen by the wayside, or there would have been a convenient excuse or a reason to deprioritize it. But just having it there and having it as something that is part of me, I think has made quite a difference. And you know, that the nature of my relationship, I think, with the pledge has also changed somewhat over the last few years. So about 2 years ago, you know, I was doing the pledge by myself, but my wife got more and more interested in it, and so we decided, okay, all our finances are pooled, let's try and figure out a way to donate 10% as a unit. So we figured out how to do that together, which was a really interesting and fun thing to do. And in the last year, we've kind of moved closer to the further pledge, which is we sat down and figured out what is our budget for the year in terms of what we need to live, to have nice holidays, to pay off our rent and all the other things, and then, okay, let's aim to donate everything that we can on top of that. And so it's been a really fun journey for me.
That's great. And yeah, I know that you mentioned before that you wanted to briefly mention about how you and your wife are now donating together, and I think that's great that she's become so interested in it as well, based on your, I guess, like excitement for giving, which is wonderful. So I wanted to ask you both a little bit about who you think should take the pledge and maybe who shouldn't be taking the pledge. I'm not sure if either of you wanted to start on that one.
Go ahead.
Please go.
Yeah, I think one thing, I mean, I don't have a general rule. I don't know if I could like
Yeah, that's fine.
tell someone or, yeah, I think for myself that I think about is that I think I'd really want to think about taking the pledge or maybe even creating some kind of other pledge or some other commitment mechanism for myself if I moved out of an environment where I'm constantly surrounded by people who have kind of trying to improve the world as a very, very core part of what they're trying to do, and kind of a thing that they think about and talk about. And yeah, I mean, I work at CA. I spend a bunch of time just talking to people who are really excited about all these donation opportunities or their work, and I'm very excited for them. And I think if, for whatever reason, I moved to be in a very different place or just like work at a different organization, that's a place where I'd want to design a like really make sure to commit myself in some way. Kind of other things that come to mind is I think I'd probably want to start with a trial of some kind, either just by signing up for a recurring donation or something like a trial pledge. So if you've done that, my guess is that's like if you've done that and you've felt good about it, that seems like a great sign that that person should take the pledge. Yeah, maybe you have.
Yeah, I think it's a tough question to answer. I think one would be if you do or anticipate that you'll have significant life or career volatility. I think that might be a reason to just take pause for a second. So if you know that you have care responsibilities in your life or that your career is one where you're not necessarily, I'm quite lucky, I will hopefully always be able to be employed as a doctor, but you know, a lot of people don't have that, I guess, that security or might have quite volatile jobs. So I think that might be one reason to, you know, think about how realistic it would be, because even though it's a non-binding commitment, you know, as Gracie said, you know, you want to try and take it seriously. It can be disheartening if you have that volatility and then you're unable to fulfill that pledge later. I also think if you haven't done much giving before, I think try just giving some money initially, get some momentum going, and then I think that, at least for me, once I started to give, it has this kind of infectiousness to it. And I think that you'll know when you're ready for it, or there'll be a natural moment where it starts to feel more a part of who you are rather than just an activity that you've done once or twice or that you are doing. And so perhaps once you've done it and it starts to feel a little bit more part of who you are, then that might be the right point, rather than if you've not done much donating before. But I think in general, there's no real reasons to never take it. I think there's always going to be, there's never going to be the ideal time. There's always going to be one or two things that you'd be like, oh, but, I might have this coming up or this thing might come up. I don't think there'll ever be an ideal moment to take a pledge. It's always going to require, I think, to some extent, a little bit of just a leap of faith. And so I think it does require just a little bit of taking a little jump at some point.
Yeah, okay. Well, I actually think maybe that's a great point to stop before I'm going to do a little bit of a close, and then we're going to get back into some Q&A, just given the amount of time that we have left. So I'm going to leave you two both here on the stage, if you don't mind, while I go through just a little bit more. Great. And thank you so much to Akil and Liska for sharing so far. Thank you. And so, yeah, as I said, I'm going to do a little bit of wrapping up, and then we'll get into some Q&A, which is great. So today's talk so far has mostly centered around the Giving What We Can pledge and various considerations around giving 10% of your income. But I wanted to touch briefly again on the trial pledge. We think that taking a trial pledge is a really good idea if you're interested in giving impactfully, but you might not be ready to take a Giving What We Can pledge. You can pledge an amount from 1% to 10% of your income, and you can pledge anywhere from 6 months up to 5 years. Like I said, we found that many of these people actually aren't aware that we even have a trial pledge, but it can be a great way for you to test out giving at a higher level, to see if a formal commitment can help you live up to your values, or to help you slowly scale your commitment over time. And I think one of the harder to quantify reasons to pledge is that every new pledge is helping us build a culture where giving effectively and significantly is a norm. And it's really tough to try and change a norm, even in a pretty small community. And we really need those who are willing to be part of the first 10,000 to help the next 10,000 people feel more comfortable with doing something out of the ordinary. A lot of people are worried about being judged or being the only one they know that donates 10% or pledges. And the more we can grow our community and add more names to the public list and help more people across the world feel connected, some of these barriers will go away. We've also heard from people that they'd be much more likely to pledge if their friends and family were public about it. And as you heard earlier in this talk, Giving What We Can is aiming to reach 10,000 active Giving What We Can pledges this year, and then lay the groundwork for the next 10,000, and then hopefully 100,000 and 1 million. And we really want you to help us be part of driving this growth so that we can achieve this. Every 2 years, or in just 2 years, if we got there, we could do this. It's amazing. So even if you're not ready to pledge 10%, or you never will be, we think that you taking a trial pledge and talking to people around you about pledging will meaningfully help us get there together. So it's really worth thinking about if you believe in our mission. And a couple of other things before we get into the Q&A, just so Liska and Akil don't have to sit up here for too much longer. If you're already a pledger or effective giver, but you wish more people knew about effective giving or pledging, we'd love to have you at the Effective Giving meetup this weekend, where we'll be talking about ways to raise awareness about the pledge and effective giving in your own networks. Talking about giving is really successful and encourages a lot more people to give, but it can be hard to know how to have these conversations. So make sure you come by to that session if you'd like to learn more. And if you're interested in taking a trial pledge or learning more about the trial pledge or the Giving What We Can pledge, you're welcome to come to my office hours after this session, our community office hours on Sunday, or you can come and visit the Giving What We Can staff and volunteers all weekend at a pledge booth that we're setting up in the Aurora Ballroom. We'll be wearing these lanyards. If you see anyone around the conference wearing one of these lanyards, you can come up to us and talk to us about pledging. We'd love to chat to you. We'd love to hear any concerns that you might be facing or really anything you have to say. And I'm really grateful to be surrounded by people at this conference who are trying to do so much good, whether that's through effective giving or otherwise. And coming back to my own journey, I actually took a pledge before I'd ever met anyone in this community in person. And so I was really inspired by so many people just by seeing their names on the public list of pledges on the Giving What We Can website, by reading people's blog posts about their commitment to helping others. All of those things genuinely propelled me first to give 10% of my income, but then to pursue the career that I have now. And that's why I believe so passionately about the value of this kind of changing a norm and getting more people to do it, because I know how much it inspired me personally. So I wanted to just end on that note, and thank you all for coming to this talk. And I'm really hoping to chat to you a little bit throughout the weekend, and that's it really. So thanks so much, and love to see you more this weekend.
All right. Thank you so much to all of you, and thank you, Frederick, for the seat. We've got just a few minutes and a couple of questions from the audience that we'll go over, and then I do encourage you to head towards Drake after this for office hours if we don't get to your question and you want to ask more of these lovely speakers. So I'll start right off with a question from Oscar, who's wondering, to what extent has Giving What We Can spread beyond the effective altruism community? And insofar as it hasn't, are there any plans in place to sort of make it more attractive to the mainstream without compromising on the sort of core of the EA ideas?
Yeah, I think that so many of our pledges are outside of what we would consider the effective altruism community, but most of the people that are pledging are people who are at least inspired by the effective altruism principles. So some of the key sources that we have for new pledges are through various media sources or kind of high profile advocates that might be talking about effective altruism, but are reaching an audience that is very different to the kinds of people that might be attending this conference. So I think we're making some inroads there, and we'd love to see it spread even further, because I think effective giving is really something that everyone can get behind. So the plan is to make it much, much more broader. Yeah.
Cool. That's exciting, especially given that graph that was on the screen. I guess speaking of the relationship between Giving What We Can and the EA community, Carter has a question here. Liska, maybe you have thoughts on this in particular. He's wondering, it might make the EA community less specialized if everyone gives 10% of their income to charity instead of using it to further their own career goals. And so in particular on this idea of weighing that despecialization or sort of the lack of wiggle room for people to go off and pursue more unique directions, how do you think we can value the impact of that compared to the impact of the nations themselves?
Well, I don't know if I actually have special insight here, but I think that comes to mind is donor lotteries seem like an exciting way for people to kind of give without the idea that maybe, maybe I don't necessarily want to do tens of hours of research into the best opportunity available to me, or a really, really excellent opportunity available to me, but there's a chance I would be up for it. But the amount that I'm donating right now isn't potentially worth the investment. So you can contribute to a donor lottery, and then there's some chance that you end up deciding the allocation of a bigger pot of money. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's a thought.
Yeah, definitely a good idea.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that comes to mind here is that we also know that Giving What We Can is a great entry point into the broader ideas of effective altruism, and many people start by learning about Giving What We Can and then actually use this as a launch pad to go and pursue something more impactful or more specialized in the future. So I think this can actually work the opposite way as well, where it might actually end up with more people pursuing impact or specialized ideas the more people we have involved, because it'll reach broaden the number of people who are interested in the ideas of effective altruism.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we probably have time for one last question here. And Henry is wondering if you could just say a bit more about the wealth pledge that you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were really, really excited to partner with Chris Anderson as part of his new book, Infectious Generosity. The book actually has a whole chapter on the Giving What We Can pledge, which is pretty cool. And so this idea is that basically you can now sign a Giving What We Can or trial pledge where you will give the greater of a percentage of wealth or income in any given year. So for example, Chris recommends the idea of pledging 2.5% of your wealth or 10% of your income. And the 2.5% of wealth is kind of tied to some other giving traditions like zakat in Islam. And so the idea here is that, if 2.5% of your wealth outweighed 10% of your income, then you would give wealth in that year, or that percentage of your wealth in that year, rather than income. So this is a way to help people who might be earning more or particularly more wealthy to be giving in a way that's proportional to their resources. Because, for example, if you're earning tens of $1 million a year, or you have significant assets because you might have built a company and exited there, you might have significant wealth. And this way, we can be asking people to give in a way that makes a little bit more sense for them.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, we didn't have time to get to every question here, so I do encourage you, if you're one of those who we did not get to head towards office hours. But before we do that, just please join me one more time in thanking all of our speakers here.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, guys.